It's good to have you join us at this time of the day. But first, let's tell you that all rates have been retained. That's talking about the outcome of the just concluded Monetary Policy Committee meeting of the Central Bank. As it is, CRR, NPR, everything remains the same. We'll be looking at that on the show today. 740 billion naira was shared amongst 3 tiers of government for the month of August. The new iPhone 11 series hit stores in China on Friday, amongst worries from fans that Apple may lose China's market for missing out on 5G technology. Welcome to Your Business Nigeria. Well, the Monetary Policy Committee meeting actually has ended. The Central Bank governor just reeled out the community and retained MPR at 13.5%, cash reserve ratio, liquidity ratio, and the asymmetric rate corridor. Everything stays the same way. Nothing has been changed. A lot of issues were alluded to, talking about fundamentals that kept this rate at what it is. We'll be looking at that. I have Head of Research at AfriInvest West Africa, Robert Omotunde, is here with me. Let's begin to dig down this. Was this what you were expecting? Let's start that way.
Absolutely. So we expected that the Monetary Policy Committee, as usual, will retain the MPR at 13.5%, CRR at 22.5%. And of course, liquidity ratio at 30%. So it's not a surprising decision to us.
With all of the fundamentals, many were looking at lots of issues, the constitution of the Economic Advisory Team, GDP reports for second quarter, and all of that. Many thought there might have been a shift, even inflation.
Well, again, that was a consideration. I mean, you listen to the central bank governor when he was reading out the communique, he suggested that they actually consider the option to ease, but they found out that easing will put more money in the system, increase money supply, and even increase speculative attack on the naira. And this is something that is of concern, great concern, to the Central Bank of Nigeria. So they don't want to miss that. They don't want to, create a situation where there is so much naira liquidity in the system, and then it begins to speculate over the currency. So the easing option was not considered. Again, they considered the option of tightening, and they reiterated that will have implications on growth, which is already at a very feeble state. So the only option was to just retain the MPR at 13.5%, while you expect. And then the central bank governor mentioned something, why they expect the heterodox policy. Again, this is something that, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, we as AfriInvest, have highlighted the policy of central bank as being unorthodox. Orthodox means you're following convention, you're doing things the way they are conventionally known to be done. But here, the central bank has adopted that heterodox policy, and I think this year particularly, the central bank has come out boldly to own up to its policy of being heterodox in most of its macroeconomic policies. And again, we can begin to dissect this. Most of the decisions of the central bank as it comes to that adoption of heterodox policy as doing things against convention are things that we differ on, especially in moving the economy forward.
I'd like to ask you this question very straightforward.
Yeah.
Can the central bank save this economy?
Again, it's not a question for the central bank alone.
I know.
We need a
they have a
team.
role.
We need a team. Central bank has a very important role. And if you listen to the governor and most of the policies that the central bank has rolled out over the last, let's say, 3 to 4 years now, you will notice that the central bank has been trying to touch on all of the aspects that you need to grow an economy. See, there are 4 critical aspects to grow an economy. There is the monetary policy, the fiscal policy, the trade policy, and the investment policy. Now, all of these 4 are contained in a typical gross domestic product model that you will see. Unfortunately, because we've seen some slack on the part of the fiscal authority, which should be responsible for investment, trade, and fiscal policy, the central bank tends to, in some cases, bite more than it can chew, in trying to delve into issues of trade and investment and, some fiscal actions that should be taken by the fiscal authority. We see the central bank coming in through different interventions and all of this. So, fairness to the central bank, to grow this economy, all hands must be on deck. It's not only the job that the central bank must do. But I think the central bank has been doing its bit, albeit I don't think it's optimal for the economy.
Now, he commended federal government for the planned introduction of increase in VAT and also talking about redundant public assets, which is something that has also been on the front burner, resuscitating redundant assets. What do you make of that submission?
Again, the central bank has to be happy that the fiscal authority is taking steps to increase revenue, because do not forget, the central bank has been at the receiving end. Whenever there is a revenue shortfall, they result to the central bank. And if you check the data from the central bank, in terms of overdraft facility from the CBN to the government, it's alarming. I mean, in 2019 alone, there have been close to 3.5 trillion naira of advancement in terms of overdraft from the central bank to the FGN, the federal government of Nigeria. So the central bank would definitely want that revenue profile of government to improve so that we can reduce the ways and means in which the central bank, practically prints money and gives to the government to fund its deficit. This is not something that is optimal for us in running an economy. Then again, the central bank touched on something that is critical, which is saying to the government or advising government to consider freeing up redundant assets. And indeed, there are so many redundant assets within the system. I mean, I know of studies that have been carried out, some respected macroeconomic experts who have offered advice to government that when you check through ministries, departments, and agencies, right, there are agencies that have assets that, are practically redundant. Imagine an agency like NIPOS, Nigeria Postal Service, having a more than 20 floor building, and it doesn't occupy more than 1 or 2 or 3 floors in that same building. Definitely, that's redundancy. We need to see how we can begin to, look at the economics of even the assets that are owned by government. Meanwhile, these assets are in a very prime location. Even if you will not give up the asset, can you get like a company that will be into facility management and help you to run this, and then you get a lot of tenants and make more revenue for the government? If you won't do that, can you sell this asset and at least make some money? Because again, I do not believe that government should run businesses. But again, if you can involve the private sector, they can help you, in optimizing most of these assets. And I think this is very critical. The aspect the government may not want to look at is the big elephant in the room, which is most of our oil and gas assets. Yeah. We do not have business running those joint ventures with the IOCs, who are pretty much smarter than us, right? Look at the production that we claim we have. Production of oil. We've been around the 2 million barrels per day production since the 70s. We have not improved, right? And I do not believe that we don't produce more than 2 million barrels. But we are not smart enough to outsmart those so-called technical experts, from the IOCs. Perhaps the government should start looking at opportunities to free up some of those things. Why do we need to have 60% share of the JVs? We can reduce our stake to 10%. Do you know how much of money that will give to government? And it will even incentivize the so-called IOCs to invest in the oil and gas sector, which they are not doing at the moment. So there are low-hanging fruit that the government can consider. Albeit, we now start looking at, they are privatizing, we are selling national assets. And most Nigerians don't even know what benefit they get from those national assets. They are better sold than held the way they are. They are getting to the level where they are becoming redundant, and we are not optimizing.
It's really worrisome, even at this time where government is about to even borrow again from the World Bank. We got that release just this morning that they're about to borrow about $2 billion again from the World Bank. And when we have this assets line follow, I think something really needs to be done that angle. Let's also look at the effect of the crude oil price regime. That's something very important before we even look at the international, talking about the UK, Brexit, and the US-China trade war. All of this are fundamentals that the central bank will definitely consider when taking decisions like this.
Correct.
What impact do you think all of this have had in just retaining this rate?
Well, I think the central bank has been spot on in advising the National Assembly to be careful of increasing budget benchmark. For the 2020 budget, the proposal is suggesting a benchmark that is very conservative. We've analyzed it in this studio,
yes,
the conservative nature
Very.
of that, because the dynamics in the oil market is not suggesting that we will have, a robust price level going into 2020. So it will be advisable for that to be retained, because definitely there are global concerns. Some people will argue that the recent attack on the Saudi oil asset is positive, but I mean, the Saudi government had come out to say within 1 month we'll get this fixed, So the outlook on oil prices are not looking good. The trade tensions between the US and China is also very major, And for a developing economy like ours, emerging markets generally, some may say, oh, when the two elephants, are fighting, it's the grass that suffers. So, I mean, there's a need for us to be much more to be much more proactive, so that some of the effects of all of these activities will not, have very detrimental effect on the Nigerian economy.
Let's look at even the effect, talking about the 60% loan to deposit ratio for banks. Central Bank is still coming out to say growth in credit remains low. How do we get this?
And I think the central bank, this is one fundamental point the central bank keeps missing, right? Central bank tells the banks to maintain minimum 60% loan to deposit ratio. And when you look at the data over the last 10 years, it's very recently that we are beginning to see slowdown in loan to deposit ratio. There was a time in this economy, just 10 years ago, when loan to deposit was as high as 80, there was a point it was as high as 90%. In the last 10 years, what has changed? In 2015, 2016, we had that vulnerability within the system where the banks, we had high NPL as a result of activities within the oil and gas sector, general commerce, manufacturing, and the power sector. We have not come out of that problem. And then the central bank is, trying to force the banks to create more loans. This is what we term exuberant loan growth. It can only lead to crisis. And I think the central bank needs to watch it. But that aside, when you now analyze the data, the current data, the additional loan the central bank is advocating for, if the banks maintain the 60% loan to deposit ratio, is something shy of 900 billion naira. Now, the truth is that the banks will be very careful. There are risky sectors within the economy. The sector that is of importance to the central bank are not the sectors the banks are likely to lend to. The reason is because they are too risky, right? These sectors are too risky. So the banks will still go for the big players. 900 billion naira for the entire industry. I tell you, less than 5 corporates who are prime borrowers can take up this entire money, and then the banks will be consistent with what the central bank, wants. I don't think this is the way to do it. In the real sense of it, the central bank, the Monetary Policy Committee fixes CRR at 22.5%. Effective CRR in the system is closer to 28% as at April data. Now, the other point is, part of the decision of the MPC is that liquidity ratio should stay at 30%. If liquidity ratio is at 30%, at best, the banks should be lending 70% of their deposit. Do you know that when you compare industry data of loans relative to deposit, the banks have lent more than 70% of the deposit, so to speak, because they have used their own capital as well as other borrowings from the capital market and other sources to fund the so-called risk asset. So when the central bank is asking them to reduce loan to deposit ratio to 60%, it's more or less asking them to go, borrow additional funds or use part of their capital to create this so-called risky asset that will become problem in the next 1 to 2, 3 years. I think we should slow down. The banks want to make money, right? The yield they will get on loans is far much more attractive than the federal government can give. So why are the banks not lending to where they will get higher yield? Then that is the area the central bank should be addressing. Unfortunately, it's not even the call of the central bank. These are fiscal issues to de-risk the macroeconomic environment. Look at security concerns, for example. Do you want to lend to someone who is operating in the core north where some of the security issues are prominent, right? Knowing that the ability to be able to collect and recover your fund will be very, very slim. So again, de-risking the sector is the way to incentivize the DMBs, the deposit money bank, to lend to the risk sector. It is not by coercion. I think that is very
That
instructive.
needs to be pointed out, right?
Yeah.
Now, talking about the banks wanting to make money, lately you heard another charge. They was introducing this new charges on withdrawals and deposits, and Nigerians, everybody has been like, what is happening? We just heard of VAT from 5% to 7.5%, and now we're coming with this. How did this come to you? People say banks are making a lot of money. We see their turnovers, we see profits, we see figures at the stock exchange, billions of naira. So what's going to happen to us? This little change that we have, they're taking off all of this percentage.
Now we need to know that this is a charge to that is meant to serve as a deterrent. The central bank had a very fantastic document they put out in 2011 to start the implementation of a cashless policy. Now, between 2011 and till date, you will agree with me that a lot of innovations have come out about banking transactions, transfer of funds, POSs that have been used, and how you can seamlessly use technology, to carry out your transaction. Unfortunately, the central bank has been bowing to pressure. Every time the central bank comes out and say, oh, because when they were supposed to start this, it was supposed to start in Lagos and Abuja and then spread to other parts of the country. Unfortunately, every time the central bank has come out to say, oh, we want to implement this, it's either there are some powers that do not want it to happen. But it has to happen someday, right? Maybe the central bank has not been, very vocal in terms of trying to enlighten the public, the benefits of going cashless. Think about it. If you run a business, why should you, receive cash of 500,000 or above? It's very risky. You're even putting yourself at some risk, at some form of risk. Whereas you could get a POS, or you could get some transfer to be done, or you could get a checkbook or a bank draft that is much more reliable, and say, oh, give me a bank draft, and then I'll cash it. These are things that I think the central bank is trying to encourage, and I think I support them, right? Never minding some of the issues that we're having in the system right now. It's even a way to get people to be financially included. Rate of financial inclusion, and I know there are different conversations around. The National Assembly yesterday has the central bank to revert to status quo. Unfortunately, it's not within their core, really. The central bank was set up by an act of parliament. What the legislators to do is to go back to that act, setting them up. The central bank has the power over monetary policy management and even financial system administration. And this cashless policy falls within the purview of their mandate. I don't think the parliament can instruct them, because tomorrow the central bank may decide to devalue the currency, and then the National Assembly will say revert to status quo. Then the central bank has completely lost its independence. I don't think this is the right thing.
Almost finally now, we've been talking about consumer mortgage. Everybody's been talking about it. There was a time Aliko Dangote spoke about this, that Nigerians we need to encourage mortgage kind of system, that not everybody can just afford buying a house, buying a car. There are processes that was done outside the country. Now, tell us, how do we have this environment conducive for this kind of process, talking about improving mortgage all around Nigeria?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, if you speak to a mortgage bank, the least rate you will get, depending on the kind of borrower you are, may be around 17%. And this is something you're supposed to pay back over the next 15 years. Most mortgage PMIs, primary mortgage institutions, are willing to go with you for as long as 15 years. But look at the risk involved, and these risks are multifaceted. It has nothing to do with the PMIs alone. I mean, we still see some commercial banks that are giving, mortgages, be it they have a shorter tenor for repayment, maybe 10 years or some 5 years. Now, the issue is there's so many risks in the system. Look at the land administration, for example. To get a proper mortgage in Lagos, since you're in Lagos here, you know how long it takes you to get even the mortgage bank to subscribe. Because the issue is, even in the use of the land, how easy is it to procure all the documentation necessary to get the mortgage? To get your CFO, how long does it take in Lagos? These are issues, these are areas where government can come in. Why can't you make the process seamless? You buy a land, to get the necessary title. Why can't you make it as seamless as it is to buy bread, to perfect your documentation for land? And this is where most of the issues. If you want to fund any project in Ikoyi, anywhere from this studio, from this area, all the way to the island, land cost is usually major, right? Yes. It's usually major. If you take the cost of land out of the equation, then you have a lower bill to deal with, then it might be convenient, and with right titles, it's more convenient for the PMIs to fund it. Even interest rates can go lower, because all of the risk involved in mortgage creation is what the bank will sit down and factor and say, I'm going to charge you 18%. If the risks are lower, the bank may be willing to charge 10%. And the more credits you create, the more money you make as a bank.
Robert Omotunde, Head Research for Invest West Africa. Thank you very much. It's always nice.